Most men don't have a focus problem. They have an identity problem dressed up as a focus problem. You've probably told yourself the same story, that you just need a better system, a better app, a better morning routine. That if you could just organize your time correctly, everything would click into place. You've read the productivity articles. You've watched the tutorials. You've made the lists. And somehow, 2 weeks later, you're sitting in the same position with 17 open tabs, 3 half-finished projects, and a quiet, growing sense that something is fundamentally wrong with you. It's not wrong with you, but something is working against you, and you've been misreading it the entire time. Here's the truth most men don't want to sit with. The inability to focus on one thing is not a productivity failure. It is a symptom of a fragmented identity. When a man doesn't know clearly who he is and what he is building, his attention scatters by design. The mind isn't broken. It's searching, and a mind that is constantly searching cannot commit. This is where most men lose an entire decade. Let's start with the psychology, because without it, everything else is just surface-level advice that stops working the moment your motivation dips. Psychologists often describe a state called diffuse activation, when the brain's reward system is spread across too many competing signals simultaneously. Your phone gives you a small dopamine hit. A new idea gives you another. A conversation, a notification, a fantasy about a future version of yourself. Each one delivers just enough stimulation to feel meaningful, without requiring you to actually do anything meaningful. Over time, your nervous system becomes calibrated to novelty, not depth. Novelty. And the moment something real demands sustained effort, your brain registers it not as a challenge, but as a threat. This is the exact moment you disappear from your own life. Research suggests that chronic overstimulation, the kind most men experience from smartphones, social media, and fragmented daily schedules, literally reshapes how the brain processes reward. The threshold for what feels satisfying rises. Simple, deep work starts to feel boring before it even begins. Men who are functioning at this level often describe it as a lack of passion, a lack of direction, or a feeling that nothing excites them anymore. But that's not emotional emptiness. That's a nervous system that has been trained to demand constant input and cannot tolerate the silence that focused work requires. What makes this particularly dangerous is that the overstimulated man rarely feels like he's wasting time. He feels busy, engaged, even productive, right up until the moment he looks at what he's actually built. And this is the part most men don't want to hear. You are not unfocused because your life is too chaotic. You are unfocused because you have been unconsciously choosing stimulation over substance for long enough that it now feels like your natural state. Every time you switch tasks without finishing, every time you opened a new tab instead of sitting with a hard problem, every time you started planning a new goal before executing the last one, you are training your brain to avoid depth. That training compounds, quietly, until the man sitting across from his own potential cannot hold a single thought long enough to do anything with it. Now let's talk about identity, because this is the piece nobody is discussing. A common explanation among behavioral researchers is that sustained focus requires what's called a stable self-concept, a clear internal answer to the question, who am I, and what am I actually committed to? When that answer is vague, the mind compensates with what psychologists call self-monitoring behavior. You read about the man who wakes up at 5 and runs. You absorb content about stoicism, about money, about fitness, about charisma. You rotate between identities like they are outfits, picking up the framework that feels most compelling in the moment, never holding any of them long enough to be changed by them. This is what you're doing wrong without realizing it. You are collecting identities instead of building one. And the brutal irony is that this behavior feels like progress. It feels like you are growing, learning, expanding. But there is a difference between collecting information and integrating it. A man who has read every book on discipline and still cannot sit with one task for 40 minutes has not learned discipline. He has learned how to feel like he is pursuing discipline, which is a completely different thing, and in many ways a more dangerous one, because it removes the urgency. It creates the sensation of movement without the reality of it. The uncomfortable truth is that information consumption, at a certain volume, stops being education and starts being a sophisticated form of avoidance. One that is particularly hard to confront because it looks, from the outside, like ambition. This is where most men lose respect, not from others, first, but from themselves. So what does the correction actually look like? Not a system, not a habit stack, a confrontation. You need to sit down and answer, with uncomfortable honesty, 3 questions. What am I actually building? Not what I want to build, not what sounds impressive, but what I am genuinely willing to suffer through. What am I repeatedly starting and abandoning? And what does that pattern reveal about my actual commitments? And what stimulation am I using, daily, to avoid the discomfort of doing real work? Answer those 3 questions honestly, and you will not need a productivity system. You will have something more powerful: clarity. And clarity does not require motivation. It generates it. The behavioral correction is equally direct. Pick one thing, not your favorite thing, not the most exciting thing, the most important thing, and protect it from your own impulses for 90 days. Not because 90 days is magic, but because it is long enough to feel the discomfort of depth without immediate reward, and to cross through it anyway. Every time you feel the pull to switch, to check, to explore something new, treat that impulse not as inspiration, but as avoidance in a different costume. Because that is almost always what it is. Reduce your inputs. Radically, not moderately. Men who cannot focus are almost universally men who are consuming far more than they are producing. The ratio is broken. Fix the ratio before you fix anything else. And stop romanticizing complexity. The men you actually respect, not the men you follow online, but the men whose lives you would genuinely trade for, are almost always men who do fewer things, more completely, over longer periods of time. Their focus is not a talent. It is the result of ruthless prioritization practiced until it becomes character. Most men understand this intellectually and do nothing about it, which is perhaps the clearest evidence that the problem was never known to begin with. You are not scattered because you have too many gifts. You are scattered because you have not made a decision. Most men stay stuck not because they lack the capacity to focus, but because they have never fully accepted that choosing one direction means genuinely releasing the others, and the ego resists that. Because holding multiple possibilities open feels like keeping your options alive. In reality, it is keeping yourself paralyzed. You don't need more options. You need the courage to commit to fewer. Focus, at its core, is not a cognitive skill. It is an identity statement. It is you saying, "This is who I am, this is what I am building, and I am willing to be bored, frustrated, and temporarily invisible in service of something real." The men who operate at that level do not appear extraordinary from the outside, not at first. They appear quiet, deliberate, slightly unreachable, and over time, the results speak in a way that no amount of scattered effort ever could. You don't need to become someone else. You need to stop splitting yourself between the man you are and the 20 versions of the man you might become, and start building the one that is actually in front of you. If this resonated with something specific, the way you handle pressure, the way you perform when people are watching versus when they're not, that distinction has everything to do with what we'll cover next.